What happens when a duchess expecting sympathy walks into an interview room and finds a journalist armed with questions she never saw coming? The answer turned a routine publicity appearance into television history, and what unfolded in those 47 minutes would leave one woman's carefully constructed narrative in tatters while the other cemented her reputation as the interviewer who refuses to look away from uncomfortable truths. Before we get into what happened, make sure you're subscribed and drop a comment below telling me what you think about celebrity interviews that go off script, because you're going to want to discuss this one. The studio lights were scorching, far hotter than Meghan Markle had anticipated when she agreed to sit down with Diane Sawyer. She'd done this dance before, controlled the narrative, selected friendly journalists who lobbed gentle questions that allowed her to play the victim, the misunderstood duchess. The woman who'd been chewed up by an institution too antiquated to appreciate her modern sensibility. This time was supposed to be no different. Her team had negotiated for weeks, established ground rules, created a list of approved topics. What they hadn't counted on was Diane Sawyer's unwillingness to follow anyone's script but her own. Meghan settled into the cream-colored chair, her posture perfect, her smile practiced. She wore navy blue, a power color, paired with simple jewelry that whispered rather than shouted. Everything about her appearance had been calculated to project relatability mixed with dignity. Across from her, Diana sat with a stack of papers on her lap, reading glasses perched on her nose, wearing an expression that gave nothing away. The interview began innocently enough. Diana asked about Meghan's latest ventures, her podcast, her production deals. The charitable work she claimed consumed her days. Meghan's answers flowed smoothly, each response polished and rehearsed, hitting all the talking points her publicist had prepared. She spoke about empowering women, about using her platform for good, about the importance of mental health awareness. It was safe territory, comfortable ground, where she could shine without risk. Then Diana shifted in her chair, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You've spoken extensively about your experience with the British press," Diana said, her voice measured and calm. "You've described it as a campaign of cruelty, relentless and racially motivated. But I want to understand something. You're a former actress who courted publicity for years, who maintained social media accounts with millions of followers, who called photographers to capture you doing yoga in the park, who gave interviews about your lifestyle blog. When exactly did media attention transform from something you actively sought to something you claimed destroyed your mental health?" Meghan's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. "I think there's a difference between sharing your work and being hunted," she said, her voice taking on that breathy quality she often employed when she wanted to sound vulnerable. "When I was working as an actress, yes, publicity was part of the job. But what I experienced after joining that family was something entirely different. It was invasive, it was cruel, and yes, it was racially charged." "Was it?" Diana leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Because I've gone through the coverage, Meghan, thousands of articles from the period you're describing, and what I found was remarkably similar to the coverage every woman who marries into that family receives. Catherine was called Waity Katie for years, accused of being lazy, a social climber, too common. Sarah Ferguson was absolutely savaged by the press, called every name imaginable. Even Diana, the people's princess, was hounded relentlessly, called unstable, bulimic, paranoid. So I'm asking you directly, where specifically was the racial component that made your experience uniquely terrible?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "The tone was different," she insisted. "The way they described me, the language they used, such as..." Diana pulled out a sheet from her stack. "I have examples here of headlines about Catherine, Duchess Doolittle, Kate's lazy reign. Worksheet Catherine. Here are some about you. Meghan's morning routine, Duchess champions women's rights. Meghan's touching tribute. In fact, for the first 18 months, your coverage was overwhelmingly positive, almost fawning. It wasn't until you began isolating from the family, cutting off relationships, making demands that the tone shifted, and even then, it remained largely supportive until you left. So again, where is the racism?" Meghan's jaw tightened visibly. "You're cherry-picking?" she said, her voice rising slightly. "You're choosing to ignore the vicious attacks, the invasion of privacy." Diana's expression remained neutral, but there was steel in her voice now. Or are you rewriting history to fit a narrative that paints you as a victim? Because that's what I'm struggling with here, Meghan. You claim you were silenced, yet you gave that explosive interview seen by 50 million people worldwide. You claim you were trapped, yet you left and immediately signed deals worth over $100 million. You claim you wanted privacy, yet you released a documentary series dissecting your private life, wrote endless articles, gave countless interviews, all while complaining that people won't leave you alone. Do you understand why some people find that contradictory? I wanted to tell my truth, Meghan said, and there was genuine anger flickering in her eyes now. The composed Duchess facade was starting to crack. I stayed silent while they destroyed my reputation, and when I finally spoke up, I'm attacked for that too. I can't win. Diana tilted her head, studying Meghan like a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. Or perhaps the issue isn't that you can't win, but that your version of events doesn't align with reality, and people are starting to notice. Let's talk about some specific claims you've made. You said you were married 3 days before the public ceremony, in a private ceremony with just you, Harry, and the Archbishop. The Archbishop of Canterbury publicly stated that wasn't true. That what you're calling a marriage was actually a rehearsal of vows, not a legal ceremony. Why did you present that misleadingly? We considered ourselves married, Meghan said defensively. That's what mattered to us. But it wasn't a marriage, Diana pressed. You weren't legally married. You stood in front of the world and implied something that was factually incorrect. That's not a matter of perspective, Meghan. That's just untrue. And when you're caught in an untruth, even about something relatively small, it makes people question everything else you've said. Do you see that? Meghan's hands were gripping the armrests now, her knuckles pale. I think we're getting off track here, are we? Diana flipped to another page. Let's stay on track then. You claimed that your son wasn't given a title because of his race, implying the institution changed protocols specifically to deny him. But the reality is that under rules established over a century ago by King George V, great-grandchildren of the monarch don't automatically receive titles unless they're in the direct line of succession. That's why none of Princess Anne's children have titles, why Edward's children don't use theirs. It had nothing to do with race and everything to do with established protocol that's been consistent for generations. Did you not know this when you made that claim, or did you choose to present it misleadingly? We were told things would be different, Meghan said, her voice tight. We were told there were conversations about changing his status. Conversations that you've never provided evidence for, Diana countered smoothly. You made an explosive allegation about racism within the institution, one that damaged reputations and reinforced harmful stereotypes. And you did it based on supposed conversations that no one can verify and that directly contradict established protocols. That's remarkably irresponsible, don't you think? The mask was fully slipping now. Meghan's composure, so carefully maintained, was fragmenting with each question. I know what I experienced, she said, and her voice had taken on a sharp edge. I know what was said to me. Do you? Diana set down her papers and looked directly into Meghan's eyes. Because your husband claimed someone made comments about how dark your child's skin might be, which would indeed be horrific, if true. But when pressed for details, neither of you would say who, when, or in what context. Then later you clarified it wasn't the Queen or Philip, which suggests it might have been an innocent question asked in a completely different tone than you implied. Was someone genuinely racist? Or did someone ask a question that you chose to interpret in the worst possible light to fit your narrative of victimhood? How dare you? Meghan breathed, her eyes blazing now. You weren't there. You're absolutely right. I wasn't, Diana agreed calmly. But neither was your audience of 50 million people, yet you asked them to accept your interpretation without question. To condemn an entire family based on your version of events that you refused to specify. You weaponized an accusation of racism, one of the most serious charges you can level at someone, and you did it in a way that made it impossible for anyone to defend themselves or for anyone to verify your claims. That's not truth-telling, Meghan. That's character assassination. The studio felt airless now, thick with tension. Meghan looked like she wanted to rip off her microphone. Let's talk about your relationship with your family, Diana continued, not giving Meghan a moment to recover. You've painted a picture of a loving daughter who was abandoned by a cruel father. But your father, Thomas Markle, raised you as a single parent for much of your childhood, paid for your private school education, funded your university tuition, worked double shifts as a lighting director to give you opportunities. Then, when you became famous, you cut him off completely. He had a heart attack, and you didn't visit. He begged publicly to see his grandchildren, and you refused. He gave one interview to defend himself after months of being attacked in the press, and you used that as justification to never speak to him again. How do you reconcile your image as a compassionate humanitarian with the reality that you've treated your own father with such callousness? Meghan's face flushed. "My father betrayed me," she said, her voice shaking now. "He sold stories about me. He staged photographs. He gave interviews designed to hurt me. Did he?" Diana picked up another document. "Your father gave his first interview after the wedding. After months of brutal press coverage, where he was called everything from a recluse to a drunk to a manipulative monster, he was being destroyed publicly, and his daughter, who had an army of PR professionals at her disposal, did nothing to defend him. He gave an interview to tell his side, to explain that he'd cooperated with a photographer because he was being portrayed as a slob, and he wanted to show he was preparing for his daughter's wedding. Was it the best decision? Probably not. Was it a betrayal worthy of complete abandonment? That seems remarkably harsh, especially from someone who claims to champion forgiveness and compassion. "You don't understand the complexities," Meghan said, but her voice lacked conviction now. "Then explain them to me," Diana challenged. "Explain how you can preach about mental health and kindness while refusing to speak to your father even after he had a heart attack. Explain how you can talk about the importance of family while you've systematically cut off every single member of yours except your mother, your half-sister, your half-brother, your father, aunts, uncles, cousins, all gone. And it's not just your family, is it? It's Harry's family too. His brother, who he was inseparable from his entire life. You haven't spoken to him in years. His father, barely any contact. His grandmother, you saw her what? A handful of times before she died. Every single relationship in both your lives has been severed or damaged, but somehow you're never the problem. Everyone else is toxic, everyone else is racist, everyone else is cruel. Don't you think at some point you need to look in the mirror and ask if maybe you're the common denominator?" The color had drained from Meghan's face now, replaced by 2 bright spots of red high on her cheeks. "This is character assassination," she said, her voice rising. "This is exactly what I was talking about, this kind of attack." "It's not an attack," Diana said calmly. "It's an examination of a pattern. You have a history, Meghan, long before you met Harry. You've left a trail of broken relationships behind you. Your first husband, you were married to him for 2 years. Then you sent back your wedding rings in the mail and ghosted him. Friends you had for decades, gone the moment they didn't serve your purposes anymore. Jessica Mulroney, who was one of your closest friends, who supported you through everything. You dropped her publicly over a single controversy. Serena Williams, you used your friendship with her to boost your profile, then distanced yourself. Everyone in your life is disposable to you the moment they stop being useful, or the moment they dare to question you. That's not normal, Meghan. That's a pattern of behavior that suggests the problem isn't everyone else." "I will not sit here and be attacked like this," Meghan said. And she started to reach for her microphone, but Diana's next words stopped her. "Then leave," Diana said simply. "Walk out. Prove everyone right who says you can't handle questions, that you can only exist in spaces where you control the narrative completely. Or you can sit there and defend yourself. Actually engage with the criticisms instead of hiding behind accusations of racism or sexism or cruelty. Your choice." The challenge hung between them. Meghan's hand hovered over her microphone. The crew behind the cameras held their breath. This was the moment, the decision point where everything could collapse or explode into something even more dramatic. Slowly, incrementally, Meghan's hand lowered back to the armrest. She wasn't leaving, couldn't leave, because leaving would be an admission of everything Diana was saying. "I stayed in situations that were destroying me because I believed in commitment," Meghan said finally, her voice controlled again but with an undercurrent of fury. "And when those situations became untenable, I had the strength to walk away. That's not being disposable, that's having boundaries." "Boundaries," Diana repeated, tasting the word. "Is that what you call it? Let's examine these boundaries. You've claimed that the institution, the palace, refused to protect you from press attacks, but multiple sources, including palace staff, who've spoken on record, say that you rejected advice repeatedly, that you insisted on doing things your way, That when you were told certain actions would generate negative coverage, you did them anyway, and then blamed the institution when the predicted coverage materialized. You wanted to be a celebrity, not a royal. You wanted the spotlight, the glamour, the attention, but not the responsibility or the protocol. And when you couldn't have it exactly your way, you burned it all down. Is that accurate? Those sources are lying. They have an agenda. Diana leaned back in her chair. Because I'm looking at a pattern that predates your time in the royal family. On the television show that made you famous, you were reportedly difficult on set, demanding, dismissive of crew members. Multiple people who worked with you have said you treated them poorly. When you got engaged to Harry, you allegedly made Kate cry during a bridesmaid dress fitting. Then you went on international television and claimed she made you cry. Kate has never spoken publicly about it, never defended herself, maintained her dignity in silence. But people who were there say your version isn't what happened. So who's lying? Meghan? Is it everyone else, or is it you? Kate didn't defend me, Meghan said, and there was real venom in her voice now. When the story came out that I made her cry, she said nothing. She let me be destroyed in the press. Diana's eyebrows rose. So your standard is that everyone around you must publicly defend you whenever you're criticized, but you have no obligation to tell the truth. Kate's supposed crime is silence, while you actively lied about what happened. Do you understand how hypocritical that sounds? I didn't lie, Meghan insisted. I told my truth, your truth, Diana repeated, and there was something almost pitying in her expression now. That phrase, your truth, it's become quite popular, hasn't it? The idea that everyone has their own truth, their own reality, and all versions are equally valid. But that's not how truth works, Meghan. Truth isn't subjective. Either you made Kate cry, or she made you cry. Both can't be true. Either there were racist comments about your son, or there weren't. Either you were married 3 days early, or you weren't. These are factual matters, not matters of perspective. And when your version of events consistently contradicts everyone else's, when documents and timelines and other evidence contradicts what you're saying, at what point do we stop calling it your truth and start calling it what it actually is, which is a lie? The word hung in the air like a slap. Meghan's eyes widened, her mouth opened in shock. How dare you call me a liar on television? She breathed. I'm not calling you a liar, Diana said, her voice measured. I'm pointing out that many of your claims don't withstand scrutiny. There's a difference. But since you brought it up, let's address it directly. Did you lie about the circumstances of your wedding? Yes or no? We exchanged vows, Meghan said stubbornly. That's not what I asked. Did you present those vows as a legal marriage when you knew they weren't? Yes or no? It was real to us. Yes or no, Meghan? You're twisting my words. I'm asking for a direct answer. Did you mislead people about when you got married? It's a simple question. The silence stretched out 5 seconds. 10, 15. Meghan stared at Diana with barely concealed fury. Her jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped. The entire world could see she couldn't answer, that any answer would be an admission of something she didn't want to admit. Let's move on, Diana said finally, almost gently. Let's talk about your mental health claims. You said you were suicidal, that you went to human resources at the palace and begged for help, and they refused. That's a serious allegation. But the palace doesn't have a human resources department in the way a corporation would. There's no HR office you can walk into. So who exactly did you speak to, and what exactly was said? I spoke to people, Meghan said vaguely. People whose job it was to handle these things. But you won't name them, Diana pressed. You won't specify when this happened, where it happened, what was actually said. You made a claim that painted the institution as so callous they'd ignore a suicidal woman, but you won't provide any details that would allow your claim to be verified or contextualized. Why? Because I don't want to give them ammunition to come after me, Meghan said. The tears that had been forming in Meghan's eyes evaporated, replaced by something harder. The mask of vulnerability dropped completely, and what remained was raw anger barely contained. You have no idea what you're talking about, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You sit there in your comfortable chair, judging me, when you've never experienced a fraction of what I went through. You're right, Diana acknowledged. I haven't, but I have interviewed hundreds of people who've faced genuine hardship, real persecution, actual danger. I've sat across from refugees who fled war zones, activists who were imprisoned and tortured for their beliefs, women who survived trafficking and abuse. And what strikes me about your story, Meghan, is how small your suffering actually was compared to what you've claimed. You lived in palaces. You had staff. You wore designer clothes and attended prestigious events. Your biggest complaint seems to be that people wrote mean things about you in newspapers, and you had to follow protocol. That's not oppression. That's not even particularly unusual for someone in your position. That's just life in the public eye, and it's a life you actively sought. You're minimizing my experience, Meghan accused, her voice rising again. You're doing exactly what they did, dismissing my pain, acting like what I went through wasn't valid. I'm not minimizing anything, Diana countered. I'm contextualizing it. There's a difference between experiencing difficulty, you've claimed persecution, systemic racism, institutional cruelty. Those are enormous allegations that require enormous evidence. And the evidence you've provided doesn't support those claims. It supports a much simpler narrative, which is that you were unhappy in a role that didn't suit you. And instead of handling that with grace and maturity, you threw a tantrum on a global scale. Meghan stood up abruptly, the movement so sudden that the camera operator jerked in surprise. She was still wearing her microphone, still technically part of the interview. But her body language screamed that she was done. I don't have to listen to this, she said, her voice shaking with fury. No, you don't, Diana agreed, remaining seated, calm, completely in control. You can walk away right now. You can storm off this set and prove every single person right who says you can't handle accountability, or you can sit back down and finish what you started. Because here's the thing, Meghan. You sought out this interview. Your team contacted my producers. You wanted this platform because you thought it would be another opportunity to play victim, to generate sympathy, to control the narrative. But I'm not playing that game. I'm holding up a mirror, and you don't like what you're seeing. The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity. Production staff were frozen, uncertain whether to cut to commercial or keep rolling. Diana sat perfectly still, her expression neutral but expectant. Meghan stood there, trembling with rage or humiliation, or both, her carefully curated image completely shattered. Every second that passed made it worse for her, made her look more unstable, more unable to handle basic questions. Finally, slowly, she sat back down. But something had fundamentally changed. The pretense of civility was gone. This was war now, open and acknowledged. Let's talk about money, Diana said, as if nothing had happened. You and Harry claimed you were cut off financially, left to fend for yourselves. But your father-in-law gave you millions from his private income. You inherited money from Harry's mother. You signed deals worth over $100 million almost immediately after leaving. So when you said you were cut off, what you actually meant was that you were no longer receiving money from the sovereign grant, which you were never entitled to in the first place, because Harry wasn't a working royal anymore. You weren't cut off. You just weren't being paid for a job. You'd quit. Do you understand why people find that complaint ridiculous? We had security needs, Meghan said tersely. We had expenses. Everyone has expenses, Diana replied. But most people don't go on international television to complain about being cut off when they're worth tens of millions of dollars. Most people would recognize how incredibly privileged and tone-deaf that sounds, especially when you're trying to present yourselves as victims. You're not victims, Meghan. You're extraordinarily wealthy. Extraordinarily privileged people who are angry that you can't have absolutely everything you want exactly the way you want it. Our security was threatened, Meghan insisted. They took away our protection. They removed taxpayer-funded security when you stopped being working royals, Diana corrected. That's not persecution. That's logistics. You chose to leave. You chose to move to America. You chose to pursue private commercial ventures. Those choices have consequences. You can't step away from royal duties and still expect taxpayers to fund your lifestyle. But you and Harry seem to believe you should have all the benefits of being royal with none of the responsibilities. That's not how anything works. We wanted to serve, Meghan said, but her voice lacked conviction now. She was exhausted, beaten down by the relentless questioning, by the complete dismantling of every talking point she'd ever used. Did you? Diana's skepticism was palpable. Because your actions suggest otherwise. You wanted to make money off your titles. You wanted to sign commercial deals, do interviews, produce content, all while still being considered working royals. When you were told that wasn't possible, that you couldn't monetize your royal status while representing the Queen, you left. That's not wanting to serve. That's wanting to profit. We deserved to be able to support ourselves, Meghan argued weakly. No one said you couldn't support yourselves, Diana replied. You were told you couldn't do it while also being working royals while using your titles for commercial gain. That's a reasonable boundary that applies to every member of that family. But you wanted special treatment. You wanted to break the rules that everyone else follows. And when you were told no, you branded it as racism and cruelty. That's manipulation. That's taking serious issues like racism and weaponizing them to get your way. The accusation hung there, stark and undeniable. Meghan's face was pale now. Her earlier flush of anger faded into something closer to shock. She'd never been confronted like this. Never had someone systematically dismantle her narrative with such precision and without any apparent concern for her feelings or her reaction. You've damaged real conversations about racism, Diana continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. You've made it harder for people who experienced genuine racial discrimination to be believed because you cried wolf. You threw around accusations of racism so carelessly, so strategically, that you've contributed to the very problem you claim to care about. That's not activism. That's exploitation. I experienced racism, Meghan said, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. Did you? Diana challenged one final time. Or did you experience being part of an institution that has rules and protocols that apply to everyone regardless of race, and you decided that any rule that applied to you must be racist because you couldn't? Conceive of a world where you weren't special. Because that's what this all comes down to, isn't it? You thought you were going to be the exception. You thought your celebrity, your American confidence, your modern sensibility would transform a 1,000-year-old institution overnight. And when it didn't, when you realized you were going to have to conform like everyone else, you couldn't handle it. So you left, and you've spent years trying to justify that decision by painting yourself as a victim of forces beyond your control. When the reality is much simpler. You quit because the job was hard, and you didn't want to do it anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Meghan sat there, completely still, her face a mask of controlled fury and barely suppressed devastation. Everything she'd built, every narrative she'd carefully constructed, lay in ruins around her. And the worst part was that it was all on camera, all being broadcast, all permanent. I have one final question, Diana said, and her voice was almost gentle now, which somehow made it worse. Do you have any regrets? Not about leaving, not about the interviews or the book or the documentary, but about the relationships you've destroyed. Your father, who will probably die without ever seeing you again. Harry's family, torn apart. Harry himself, isolated from everyone he's ever known, dependent entirely on you. Do you ever think about the human cost of your choices, or is it always about you? Meghan's lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time in the entire interview, she seemed genuinely at a loss for words. The question had cut through every defense, every rehearsed response, and struck at something real beneath all the performance. She started, then stopped. I did what I had to do to survive, Diana asked softly. Or did you do what you wanted to do to win? Because survival suggests you were in danger, and we've established you weren't. You were uncomfortable, unhappy, frustrated that you couldn't have everything your way. That's not a survival situation. That's just life, not going according to your plan. Asterisk if you made it this far. You know exactly why this interview became the most talked about moment of the year. Make sure you're subscribed because we'll be breaking down the fallout and the reactions. And drop a comment below.